Well, good afternoon for everyone, and good morning to Professor MacAdams. We are starting the second panel of our annual Integral Human Development Forum. This second panel will be devoted to the global lessons and local perspectives of hope and peace building. And so we would like to start with some speech from the director of our Institute of Contemporary Issues and Ethics.
May I ask a quick question? Am I on the right panel?
Yes.
Okay,
definitely.
Just wanted to make sure. Okay, thank you.
Yes, this is not a speech. This is just a short welcome. Welcome to you, and thank you all very much for being part of this conversation. I mean, this panel takes place under the framework and is part of Integral Human Development Forum, which we hold for the 7th time this year already at the Faculty of Social Sciences at the Ukrainian Catholic University. And this year, the whole forum, I mean, a few days of conferences and academic events and presentations are dedicated to the issue of hope. And I'm particularly pleased since I just arrived from the University of Notr-Dam, where we were having a conference of hope. That was Revolutions of Hope, with a special focus on Ukraine. And Jose Casanova and James, I was very happy to meet you there and participate in that event. And so somehow on the other side of Atlantic Ocean, now we continue that our kind of reflections on hope in a wonderful company. And finally, I'd like to mention and emphasize that this is Catholic Universities Partnership framework and panel, something we also used to do for several years in a row. So I'm particularly pleased that that we will be kind of hearing contributions from our dear colleagues from the universities of Catholic Universities Partnership. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to our conversation. Back to you, Oleg.
Thank you, Professor Turchanovsky. So today, as you can see from this double greeting, we have truly international community gathered on our second panel. We have Professor Mартіна Knежевич and Professor of Psychology from the Catholic University of Croatia. We have Зоран Турза, a Professor of Theology from the Catholic University of Croatia. We have Professor MacAdams from Notr-Dam, and we have with us also Jose Casanova, a well-known professor of sociology from the Georgetown University. We are also waiting for Dr. Mate Ботош from the Pazmanya Catholic University. We hope he will join us till the end of this meeting. But before jumping to your speeches, let us make a small deal. So you are free to talk as much as you want and in the style you prefer, with or without presentations, and so on. But please let us make a deal that once I raise my hand, then you can. Then probably it means that you should slowly move to the conclusions of your speech. Okay, so let us stick to 8 minutes per speech. Okay, so perhaps we can move down the list of our speakers, and perhaps let us start with Dr. Knежевич. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me just try to share my presentation. Hello, it's really a great honor to be part of this. Okay, so I cannot share my screen. I don't hear, sorry, Oleg, you muted your...
We are just looking what we can do.
Okay. Hello from Zagreb, from Croatia. Okay. Anyway, maybe I can start talking and then I can show you my presentation, just not to waste time, if you agree. I guess you'll agree. Okay. So I'm a professor of psychology and I will give you a psychologist's perspective on our consequences of war in Croatia.
Try once again, please.
I can try now. Okay. Oh, perfect. Here we go. Can you see my presentation now?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Here. I hope this works. Okay. Let me know if something starts to look weird. So I'll just give you a brief statistics about former war in Croatia, so you just know the perspectives I'm talking from. So the homeland war in Croatia was fought by the Croatian people in defense of Croatian state against the aggression brought by the Greater Serbian forces. The military interventions intensified in June of 1991. And the war lasted around 5 years here in Croatia and ended in the second half of 1995. So these are just some statistical estimations. Compared to Ukraine, Croatia is a significantly smaller country, but during the war, approximately 14,000 people were killed. Around 200,000 Croatians were ethnically cleansed from their homes. And in addition, another 100,000 were killed in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and nearly 1 million people were displaced from their homes. So this was our statistics. I think numbers are much higher, but let's stick to these ones. So I will just skip forward to what happened after the war. I have some studies that show the quality of life of our war veterans and their families. This is the focus of my studies, so I will just give you this information. So based on our research, around 5 years after the war, we had about 25% of war veterans with partial PTSD and around 17% of complete PTSD syndrome. This is significantly higher when you compare these numbers with some other statistics from other countries. And this is mostly explained primarily by war stress, although some pre-war and post-war factors such as stability of the family, social life, family relationships, and of course drug and alcohol abuse also contributed to the likelihood of the PTSD diagnosis. Interestingly, wives also had high levels of PTSD, depression, anxiety, and they had serious physical health problems. So this was a new addition to our studies compared to our colleagues in the States, for example. They didn't find similar results. But if we compare children of war veterans with PTSD, they had actually the most serious problems. If we compare the teenagers whose fathers were war veterans with PTSD, they had high levels of depression, anxiety, PTSD. Also, even though they were not participants of the war, they had poor social skills. They showed delinquent behavior, aggression, failure at school, etc. And similar results were found around Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. So this was the picture of Croatian families, war veteran families after 5 years after the war. 5 years after the war, the picture changed slightly. Our war veterans were almost at the same level of PTSD. 25% of them still had the high levels of PTSD symptoms. Even 25 years after the war, they had high levels of depression and anxiety. Even though they were treated, they were given medical help, and but they refused treatments with drugs that they were given. So we're not sure why there's such a high level of depression and PTSD and anxiety in our war veterans. But if we look at their children who were now young adults, we actually didn't find evidence of transmission of trauma from a parent to a child, which is a new addition to studies compared to American soldiers or soldiers from outside Croatia. What we did find is some kind of inadequate ways of coping with stress, and we do worry that this will what will happen with them when they encounter some of life problems. They are now at the beginning of their young adulthood, and they are starting their own families. And most of them really depend on their families, their mothers and fathers. So we worry what will happen to them when they go to middle adulthood. We will try to track their well-being in the future and see what we can do. But the most affected group, which was surprising to us, were the wives of our war veterans. If we consider just the wives without the veterans, they showed elevated levels of symptoms, PTSD symptoms, but they were not so high, so pronounced that we could talk about the diagnosis. None of the wives had the diagnosis, PTSD diagnosis. Their elevated levels of symptoms were associated with lower quality of life. In our interviews, when we talked to the wives, we discovered that they attribute their symptoms and lower quality of lives to the events in their own lives. Most of the wives of our veterans lived in areas where they themselves were exposed to war destruction. During the war, they took care of themselves and their children. Most of them were pregnant or with very young children. And after the war ended, they had to take care of their husband who suffered from mental illness, or a husband who had some war trauma. So they sort of left themselves and their mental health and physical health aside. And now, 25 years after the war, this can be clearly seen if we put the husband into the picture. When a wife has an increased level of depression or anxiety, this does not affect the husband. But when we turn the picture around, if the husband has a high level of depression and anxiety, it seems that this affects a wife so significantly that her level of mental health problems increases. And this all reduced the quality of lives of our war veteran wives. So this is actually worrying us, because none of them received appropriate care or help during the war, after the war, and even now. And most of them refuse help, even if they have a lot of physical illnesses such as breast cancer or other serious health issues. So I'm not sure how much time I have left. I'm sorry, Oleg, I haven't tracked my...
Oh, well, you have a minute or two.
Perfect, so I can just conclude. I know there are a lot of information that I just thrown at you, but it's the consequences of war in Croatia are still, I would say, still lasting. We have a lot of missing persons now, and our families are still suffering from those consequences of war because they never received proper help. Most of our wives really need attention and care. Most of our war veterans die at approximately 50 years of age, which is, I would say, a very young age. A lot of them have serious physical problems and mental health problems. A lot of them suffer from cancer, serious forms of cancer. And this is the picture of post-war Croatia today. I hope maybe some of our experiences can be beneficial for Ukraine, and I hope we can help them have a better picture of mental health of their families 25 years after this war. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Knezevich. Our next speaker, well, perhaps not to move from Croatia too far. Professor Turza, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, so I will share my screen right now. And in a minute. So just tell me when to move to the next slide, okay?
Okay, thank you, Oleg, for your assistance. So, dear colleagues, before I begin this lecture, I would like to share a deeply moving testimony from one of our research interviews with a woman who had suffered personal loss during the Croatian War of Independence. Next slide, thanks. Participant 6 We can move to the next slide, yes. At that moment, she said, I sat in the last pew. I didn't pay attention to who was sitting in the pew in front of me, but I was feeling sorry for not having shared my testimony on the bus. Everyone else did when we were returning from Medjugorje. Only X and I remained silent. I thought, why should everyone know what happened to me? Nothing really happened to me. Then, during Holy Mass, when the priest said, let us offer each other a sign of peace, the man sitting in front of me was the one who had killed my fiancée. He was from that neighborhood. I later found out that he had a little daughter whom he brought to the Mass with his wife. Of course, he didn't go up for communion. After all, he had taken a life. He turned around to offer me the sign of peace. And only in that moment, when he saw my face, did he realize to whom he was extending his hand. Researcher 3, to whom he was offering peace. Then participant 6, to whom he was offering peace. To me, whether on my right or left side, it doesn't matter. One voice beside me said, don't take his hand. But another gentle voice said, X, take his hand. You promise to forgive. I looked him in the eyes and took his hand. And I said in my heart, Jesus, I truly want to forgive him. I am in your temple. I want to forgive him. And why do you want to forgive? What made you forgive? Researcher 3 asked. Participant 6. Simply because I saw how destructive hatred is. I cannot live in hatred. Not being able to love, not being able to receive communion. Receive Jesus who forgave everyone. And if he forgave everyone, why shouldn't I forgive him? Allow me to, maybe I could try to share a presentation if I can. Oh, I see I can. Maybe it could be easier. Just give me 1 minute. Oleg, if you agree.
Or you can do it by yourself.
Okay, just 1 second.
I just must explain there was a technical error and because of which I was dropped out of this presentation. So
Okay, just a second. Screen. Okay, I hope you now see. Yes.
not for now.
Yeah, just a second maybe.
So maybe I will share it once again. Oh, okay.
Maybe I just did it now. Okay.
Yeah,
You see it?
now you can see it. Okay.
Okay. So this is here, this testimony. Yeah. Okay. So at the beginning, I just want to emphasize that I think this is it is important for the people who work in academia and researchers to focus on issues like this, forgiveness, reconciliation, just like maybe to ecological or climate crisis. So for me, this is the something that is connected with me and related to my faith, and especially to church documents as Signa Temporum, as Second Vatican Council emphasized. So we had just a small research about with interviews with participants who suffered from homeland war in some way. And we just want to try to see how Girard's mimetic theory is in practice. How we just want to hear from participants, does Girard mimetic theory is applicable in their situation? René Girard, he is one of the great anthropologists, he said that human desire is mimetic. This is just a brief summary of his thesis. He talked about mimetic triangle and said that conflict arises in this theory. Let's put it just general, this thesis. So we had one theory that we just want to discuss related to our findings in practice. And also we discussed the possibility of trying to find out if Girard's theory is more focused on negative implications. There is recently researchers and philosophers and psychologists who think that his theory could be applied in more positive way. And we just want to see if our participants connected more with positive side of mimetic theory, of negative side of mimetic theory. So we conducted this research, qualitative research. We had 23 interviews in multidisciplinary teams. I am theologian, but I have the colleagues from social sciences. And the topics were experience of trauma, forgiveness, reconciliation. And we wanted to try to find out if there is faith, spirituality, Christ as mediator in their experience. How did they relate to those topics? And we did the thematic content analysis, and we of course had our ethical approval. And we saw that central to forgiveness for them is Christ as external mediator. That is something very important for Girard mimetic theory. So we find out for the people who declare Christians that for the process of reconciliation is very important Christ, who is outside of this circle of violence. And we also saw that prayer, confession, spiritual practices in general also empower mimetic reversal. Participants also report moral transformation through imitation of Christ. And forgiveness for them is not emotional spontaneity, but a conscious spiritual choice. And I can conclude that based on this research, we can say that generally Girard's theory is embodied in real lives, that mimetic theory could open a path toward healing and reconciliation if it is put on this positive way of thinking. Then the theological reflection must accompany concrete human suffering, that mimetic dynamics can build a new social ethic rooted in Christ, and also that the church is called to promote nonviolent subjectivity and hope. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Turza. Our next speaker is Professor James MacAdams. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say how gratifying it is to see all of you, and particularly that you represent the universities in our Catholic Universities Partnership, because for 20 years, this has been exactly the goal, to have everybody work together and hope together. I had originally planned to start my panel or my presentation talking about themes, somewhat more difficult themes of transitional justice and how you addressed crimes or other issues that arise in the context of war or some form of civil strife. I'm going to modify this. I'm going to come back to this theme. I'm also going to turn to the issue of hope at the end of my presentation. But as an American, I just can't emphasize enough the significance and the shock that we have felt at this incident in the White House, which I see as a betrayal of Ukraine. I think because I'm a political scientist, we need to think hard about the implications of this abrupt shift in American policy and also what I would describe as a kind of rapprochement with Putin and Russia. So my basic premise is a sad one, and I hope I'm wrong, but it is that when peace comes to Ukraine, it will not come to the Ukraine before 2014. Rather, it will come to a truncated Ukraine, because that is what Donald Trump and Putin are determined to do, and to establish as the terms of peace. I wish it weren't the case. I hope I'm wrong, but it's at least something for us to think about now, because what it means is that post-war Ukraine, if this happens, will be in an extremely, extremely difficult situation, because Putin's shadow will hang over the country darkly, and he will take advantage of every opportunity he has to extend his control. And here, of course, we all think about the case of Georgia, where it looked like, well, there would be peace in Georgia, and we know exactly what is happening today and the crushing of democracy there. So if there is any saving grace, I think it lies in the fact that Donald Trump would really like an agreement of some kind, a successful peace of some kind, some limited kind, not because he cares about Ukraine, because I can't see any sign that he does, but rather for personal reasons, that this is a man who thinks first and only about himself. Now, I think there are two ways of thinking about Ukraine in a perilous circumstance after the war. And eventually I'm going to try to work my way up to hope, but let me talk about those two ways. First of all, from a domestic standpoint, and this is where I was going to start before, I've written a lot about transitional justice. I've written about the complexities of the transition from circumstances that involve dictatorship, ethnic conflict, and war. And one thing I know is that after war and other conflicts, it will not be enough to call for unity. You can call for it. You can call for forgiveness. But the fact of the matter is that you need to build unity, and you need to build forgiveness. So here I'm talking as a political scientist, but this is, I think, been evidenced in cases from South Africa to Spain, Argentina, Chile, Germany, and many others, that the question of, from a domestic standpoint, post-war justice will not simply go away. And in fact, if you act like it'll go away, then it's likely to fester and maybe even get worse. So in a worst case scenario, but I think a realistic one based upon other countries' experiences, I think that when the war ends, there will be a lot of finger pointing as people try to explain what happened within Ukraine. And I am not an expert on Ukraine. This might be a finger pointing at people who whose first language is Ukrainian, or people whose first language is Russian. It might be finger pointing at those who defended different forms of government and democracy. It might be finger pointing involving questions of who profited from the war. And of course, it might be finger pointing over purported collaboration and crimes during the war. Now, again, we know that these issues will rise. We know that they will recur. But it's important to recognize that when one deals with them, however one deals with them, it isn't a matter of doing nothing or doing everything. Rather, it's a matter of what one does specifically, whether it involves trials, truth commissions, restitution, what one does specifically, while at the same time keeping in mind the need for national unity at some point. So these two factors go together. My greater concern as an American is, well, what about the geopolitical situation? And here, I think the most important thing is for Ukraine's leaders now and in the future to project a message about the Ukraine situation that is immediately intelligible for policymakers in Europe and the United States. That is, for those who have the power to defend Ukraine against Russia. Now, sadly, I don't think it will be enough to point out that, well, Russia invaded Ukraine twice, that Russia is guilty of war crimes, that it has caused enormous suffering, because this is something Zelensky did in the White House. And Donald Trump showed he's not interested in those kinds of questions. It also is not going to help to get angry at any country for failing to support Ukraine in whatever way one wishes, whether that's the US, NATO, or the EU. The leaders in these countries, and especially in the United States, will resent this. But assuming that Ukraine ends up divided, and again, I hope I'm wrong, Ukrainians must devise a narrative that persuades the West that it's in its interest to defend the country. And the key word is interest. And I think that this narrative should be based upon a simple question. And the simple question is, what are Putin's ultimate aims? It's a simple question, but for policymakers, simplicity is important. One answer that seems to be taken for granted in the US is that if and when he does take portions of or get portions of Ukrainian territory as a result of a peace agreement, in the US in particular, people tend to think, well, you know, then he's going to be satisfied. And then we don't need to worry. The other answer that should be part of this narrative is Putin is not done, which I think is absolutely right. If Western policymakers can be convinced that Putin has greater ambition, it will make it possible for Ukraine to overcome its greatest weakness in their calculations. And Ukraine's weakness is simply that, like Georgia, it's not a member of NATO. It's not a member of the EU. However, and I'm slowly working my way up to hope here, however, a bevy of formerly Soviet bloc states running from the Baltics down to the Balkans are in NATO. And based on their experience, they have every reason to fear that Russia's actions in Ukraine are only the beginning of the Russian story. I have come to believe in these uncertain times that Putin's endgame can be summed up in two words. And those two words are the Suwalki Gap, the corridor running between Poland and Lithuania, and representing the only transportation link between Greater Russia to the east and Russian Kaliningrad to the west. If this issue is not handled, confronted, and taken seriously, it has all of the makings of a war. Now, one concern that I have, which I think is a reasonable concern, is that Donald Trump may simply not be willing to come to any of these countries' defense, and particularly Poland's defense, if Putin should try to capture this corridor, particularly because Putin's first step will not be military, it will be an attempt to ask for peaceful negotiations that will serve Russia's interests. But I do think that there are Republican politicians that are still motivated by the simplicity and long-proven security of the NATO alliance. And even if they are not, and in this case, we have to ask about the future of NATO itself, I have no doubt that the European members of NATO will rush to the defense of Poland. Now, I'm not predicting a war, don't want to go that far. I worry more than most people probably. I'm only saying there is ironically a germ of hope to be found in this perverse and unjust situation. If Ukraine's leaders can demonstrate that the West's longer-term interests are intertwined with Ukraine's post-war security, then there will be a greater chance that Russia will be deterred from making further incursions on Ukrainian sovereignty. In this case, the Ukrainian people will have a realistic chance, here's the hope, of rebuilding their country and cementing the foundations of democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor MacAdams. And since there is no sight of Professor Ботош, perhaps Professor Kazanova would take the concluding speech, and then we will move to the discussion.
Thank you, Oleg, and thank you to all of you for participating in this conversation. It has been already many conversations we've had, first in Munich, then Notre-Dame. Already this morning, I was in a different panel, so I'm afraid I will have to be repetitive in some of the things I say. Also, I was planning to be in a different panel, but then because I'll be taking a taxi in half an hour to go to the airport, to go to Montreal, I have to, at the last moment, switch to this panel. So anyhow, I want to basically literally say a few words about each of the aspects of our heading, global lessons of the Russian war of aggression on Ukraine. And there are three, very simple. One, the need to counter disinformation, truthfulness. What is an obvious and clear, unjustified, brutal, total war of aggression is presented as simply a special military operation in self-defense to protect the security of Russia against NATO. And so this information has been repeated again and again. A lot of people, unfortunately, in the global south have seen this as a conflict between NATO and Russia, between the superpowers, as a continuation, if you wish, of the Cold War. And therefore, Ukraine disappears from the perspective. They are not agents. They are at best victims of one side or the other, but they are not agents defending their own freedom, defending their own dignity. It's very important that this issue is maintained today, when even from the United States, the notion that this was a war of aggression started by Zelensky is maintained. The second is, we have to go back to the Helsinki Treaty. This was the attempt to bring peace and security, long-term peace and security to all of Europe. It was signed, negotiated, and signed by every European state, including the Vatican State, and US and Canada. It was based on three principles: cooperation between East and West, inviolability of territorial sovereignty, inviolability of borders, and then respect for human rights. Only on the basis of these three principles, we can re-establish peace in Europe. So the third lesson is, of global lesson is, the need for avoid perceptions of hypocrisy, of double standards. In the global south, basically people saw the very positive, generous reception of Ukrainian refugees by the rest of Europe as simply double standards compared with the way that Europe receives non-European immigrants. So it's very important that whichever position we take is on the basis of universal principles which are valid for all, for everybody. And that defending European international principles is not just for the defense of Europe, but it is for the defense of the entire world system. And this is crucial that this really, really comes across, and that all people interested in defending Ukraine realize that they can only do if they really, really maintain those universal principles everywhere, also in Gaza, in the Middle East, in Sudan, and everywhere. Very briefly on the principle of local perspectives and hope and agency. Again, here, against the brutal war, you have the courageous resistance of the Ukrainians, maintain their dignity, defending their freedom, their identity, in solidarity, voluntarism. You compare the two, what is called a special military operation by professional soldiers and by mercenaries, is contrasted with the citizens' army based on the solidarity and voluntarism of the entire Ukrainian civil society, and that has fought the war precisely with solidarity within the country and with a maximum still defense of fundamental principles of rule of law and democracy, even in times of war, and defending also the principles of a just war in bello, namely acting with restraint and unlike the way in which the Russian war has been conducted in Ukraine. But most importantly, navigating post-war healing and national unity. National unity doesn't mean homogeneity. It means accepting the pluralism of Ukrainian society. And here I would argue Ukraine needs to maintain the same principles that have worked so well to establish a democracy, to defend precisely any attempt for any presidential candidate to stay president for life, the way Lukashenko did in Belarus, the way Putin has done in Russia. And every time this has been attempted, Ukrainian society, civil society organized, mobilized, first against Kuchma, then against Yanukovych, in the Orange Revolution, then Maidan. Those are the principles. Those are the principles that Ukraine needs to remember about its own trajectory and that needs to defend. And here, the title of my presentation in Notr-Dam was The Religious Foundations of the Sociological Miracle of the Vibrant Ukrainian Civil Society. And it is a miracle when you compare with the trajectory of Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine. And the religious foundations, I argued, were based on the fact that the churches, the historical churches, were able to survive in the Gulag, in the diaspora, and underground, and basically were the foundations for the explosion of religious pluralism that happened the moment Glasnost emerged in Ukraine. And it was this pluralism that I argue was already built in the Gulag itself. It was the fact that Greek Catholics and Orthodox and Jews and Muslims and Baptists encountered each other in the Gulag and recognize each other as fellow humans and as fellow faithful people, that they could maintain this respect for each other and this respect for pluralism in civil society. So I would argue the explosion of religious pluralism and the structures of religious pluralism that Ukraine has built, especially manifested in AUKRO, the All Council of Churches and Religious Organizations, is the model that has to be maintained and that has to be, that works so well in Maidan, works well today in the system of chaplaincies, and has to be renovated for the difficult time of peace and how to reconstruct Ukraine. Obviously, very much will depend on which kind of peace. I'm not so concerned per se about giving up territories as long as it is simply an imposed peace and Ukraine does not recognize the international validity, which only will need to be basically negotiated in a truly peace agreement later. But the important thing is that Europe comes to the defense of Ukraine. So whatever Ukraine remains, partly because it will be impossible today for Ukraine to absorb those already occupied territories. The population has become so Russified. Today it will be simply a way of Putin precisely trying, like the Minsk agreement, through these territories to control the rest of Ukraine. So actually, at this point, giving up territories is not really the terrible thing, as long as you don't give up the principle of sovereignty. But what needs to be done is to make sure that whatever remains of Ukraine is able to be reconstructed, that people, the many millions of Ukrainians who have left, are able to come back, that there is support for economic reconstruction. And of course, Europe has to recognize that today the Ukrainian army is the best army in Europe, the only one that is able to defend Europe from Putin. So it is in the mutual interest of a new European security that really Europe comes to the defense of Ukraine and Ukraine comes to the defense of Europe, as it has done now for 3 years. So on those terms, if we don't lose that ultimately the incorporation of Ukraine into the European Union and the incorporation of Ukraine into whichever new form of European security, because NATO is dead. As far as I'm concerned, NATO is dead. Nobody can believe in the guarantee of the nuclear basically protection, and therefore simply Europe will have to develop its own very difficult new security agreement, and Ukraine is both the problem but also the solution to whichever agreement and whichever security for Europe is going to be built. So in this respect, I'm hopeful that Ukraine will continue maintaining its resistance and be itself an important component for the reconstruction of not only of its own country, but of all of Europe.
Okay, thank you, Professor Casanova. Probably that was the end of the first part of our panel. While designing this panel as CUP-sponsored and while choosing the scholars from the Catholic University Partnership, we intentionally added this and we emphasized the local perspectives in the title of this panel, just hoping that we will see many local perspectives. And indeed, we had seen them, our colleagues from Croatia, and Professor MacAdams also offered some domestic, as he said, point of view. And then, so we could see that we share not only our Catholic or academic identity, but also some thematic and dramatic past. And then Professor Casanova offered us a more global framing of our discussion. So I can see many possible fields for questioning and discussions here. So probably let us start with our scholars or speakers themselves. Do you have any questions for one another? And that's what happens when you have so many different academic research interests. We have with us psychologists, theologian, social scientists, and political scientists. So if it was a student panel, I would insist that during the whole conference, all would have sit with their cameras turned on. But
well, I have a question just to get this started for the other panelists, and that is simply, was my presentation too dark? And there are implications of what Jose said that are also very sobering. So I'm curious about your response.
Well, personally, for me,
Well,
it was.
Yeah, please, Oleg, please.
Well, personally, for me, it was interesting to hear the American professor not mentoring, but sharing his personal fears and appealing to the problems with, say, national unity, in which America probably knows very much about. So probably it was not too bright, but at least it was illuminating. Let us say, let's put it this way. So
Well,
yes, I see your hand, but Professor Casanova began to speak earlier. So please.
I can tell you, dear Jim, that I'm shaken by the treason of the Trump administration as you are. I happen to be an American, but I am also a Spaniard. I am intellectually a German, and in my heart, I'm a Ukrainian. So it's very, very hard for me to maintain all these allegiances together. But very clearly, in this case, it is the European allegiances that have to be maintained at any cost, because we cannot trust the United States. And it's not only in Ukraine. I mean, basically, he's ready to divide up the world. You take Ukraine, I take Greenland, I take Canada, I take Panama, you, Jinping, take Taiwan. And it's the end of any type of world international system. So it's simply what is at stake is really, really the very, very possibility of thinking of a global community of nations in which the superpowers simply do not dominate the weak countries and force them to do whatever they want. So in this respect, yes, it is dark, but it is dark because the threats are really, really, we can only go back to the 30s to the dangerous situation in which we find ourselves. But there is enough learning, I think, from what Europe had to do, a lot of rethinking after World War II, after World War I, after 300 years of constant wars between European nations. And it was based on the reconciliation of France and Germany that had been at war for 75 years. And this was what the Treaty of Rome was all about. It began really, really as an attempt to put an end to the war between France and Germany. It was very much organized by Christian democratic parties, by the Catholic Church. No socialists, no nationalists, no Protestant country was ready to join at first European Union. But ultimately it has been the most successful experiment in creating structures for many countries to live together in peace, security, and prosperity. And we cannot give this up because this is hope for the entire community of nations. So Europe will have to do it for itself, but also for the whole world, because the world needs this model of international cooperation, living together in peace, security. And despite the differences, we maintain national identities, and yet we realize that we have to overcome the kind of conditions that were constant warfare between European countries. I've mentioned the peace between France and Germany, but the same happened with the reconciliation between Germany and Poland. Once again, Poland had suffered from German aggression from the first basically already under the Prussian dismemberment of Poland between the three empires, and then again the Rapallo, and then again the Ribbentrop, and so it's crucial that this doesn't happen again. That we simply create structures in which this is not really never again, never again.
Thank you, Professor Casanova. Professor Turza.
Just want to refer for what Professor MacAdams you said about finger pointing. So I think we could approach differently. So we can approach the finger point as some negative, as trying or the search for scapegoats to be sacrificed and to be in a safe mode in the future. But also I'm just wondering what you really meant about this. Is this negative or positive? Because the positive side of this could be that we could easily clean our, let's say, memories with, I think, Pope John Paul II. So what lies ahead is confronting the past and cleansing our collective memory. The paradox is disturbing in some towns in Croatia. We have victims live among perpetrators. In some cases, rape victims face their aggressors as police officers. So we have those testimonies. If this reality is ignored, this desire for revenge grows silently, contaminating society, like some toxic, I don't know, chemistry. So I think that religion and churches will have and now have has a lot of job to do, fostering healing, forgiveness, and let's say the hope for the reconciliation.
Well, my quick response is what you're saying is what the point that I was trying to make. You can't ignore abuses from the past. On the other hand, you have to figure out what to do. And if it's churches that are supporting reconciliation, I think that's a fabulous response. But in all of these cases, after dictatorships, after war, after ethnic conflict, all of these issues arise, even if they're not true, even if they're unfair, they arise. So you have to deal with them. You can't ignore them. Yeah,
and if I could add that what Professor Casanova said, this will be obviously not just some intra-Ukrainian thing to cleaning the memory, but also inside of NATO countries, of European countries. So I think we together must already think about how to heal our European or NATO memory.
Yes, sure. So we come to the conclusion that there can be no, say, cheap forgiveness or cheap reconciliation without establishing justice or search for truth. But
if I may add something, from the experience of the French and German reconciliation, and the Polish and German reconciliation, in both cases, it was the victims that initiated the process. It was French Catholics fighting in the resistance that said we must begin talking to our brother German Catholics before the war ends to basically build the conditions for peace afterwards. And it was the Polish bishops that wrote the letter to the German bishops asking for forgiveness, when in fact it had to be the other way around. So unfortunately, Ukraine will need to hear even also, it's the victims usually that are they need to be generous and really overcome the hatred, because they realize that for their own sake they need to start the process of reconciliation, both within Ukraine, within the Ukrainian churches, especially within the Orthodox churches, and eventually also with Russia. Of course, if Russia is ready to truth and reconciliation.
also, we have a solid portion of our listeners, so probably there are questions from them.
Yeah, if I may, just a second. Yeah, we are operating a few computers in here, so we have to adjust properly whenever we start speaking. Yeah, if I may ask a question or a couple of questions, and one thing is, I'm grateful to Professor Knezevich for her presentation. And my question is related to children. Somehow, based on your experience, maybe you can kind of try to explain what we might kind of expect or hope for, or what should be done as we're kind of moving through those kind of very difficult and challenging years. It's 10 years already, and there's no any kind of visible and very short end of this war. And this is kind of massive time by all means, especially if you are 15 or if you are at the age of 18 as our students who enter the university. Lots of our Ukrainian children, they were kind of born into this war somehow. So many of them, they've never ever lived in a peaceful country. And this is something kind of unimaginable, which was difficult for us to get. I mean, it's a very kind of complex concept. Maybe this is not unique if you look at the world kind of history, but somehow here and now, this is like a massively devastating experience if you begin to think of those issues. So the question would be, what do we do with that? What is there some kind of impact? Will there be some kind of impact? A very practical question might be whether we can and in which way we should kind of help our students, as a matter of fact, who decide to enter universities and who have their kind of long-term plan for 4 years, hoping that they will graduate and complete that education. They seem to be very energetic, very empowered, very motivated, even though they lived more than half of their life so far in this war. So this is one thing. The other thing I would like quickly to mention is that I'm often kind of asking myself a question as to how we possibly could be converting this kind of moral energy, which we have plenty of during these times. I mean, there's a lot of suffering and death, but there's a lot of solidarity, there are lots of kind of heroism and sacrifice and very kind of genuinely moral and spiritual acts, and you almost kind of physically feel that power in Ukraine and that kind of courage, etc. So somehow thinking of the future, is there any way we could kind of preserve this energy, convert this energy, turn it into some kind of endowment for many years as we will be kind of building, transforming, recovering Ukraine? And I'm just kind of, my question would be, maybe this is kind of a wrong question, or how would you kind of react to this? Maybe that's not the best way to ask this question. And my third thing would be, I'm not really, I mean, if we listen to public discourse these days, you wouldn't probably hear the word victory at all. So somehow there's kind of there is ceasefire or some kind of peace, words which I kind of mentioned, but to me, the issue of kind of victory is very much related to the whole kind of issue of justice. So somehow I'm not kind of very happy that the whole kind of issue of justice and maybe some kind of victory, if victory could be understood in the sense of kind of victory over that ideology of Russianism, which is very toxic, which is very venomous, which is kind of has brought deaths of so many people. And wouldn't be somehow correct just in designing the future and the peace talks and everything still somehow hold to those justice issues and set a larger kind of framework, even if that would take years or decades somehow just to get at that stage. But nonetheless, I'm kind of not very happy that that kind of discourse isn't really kind of present as we think about the closest future of Ukraine. So let me stop with this, and if you can respond somehow reflect on those questions, I'd be very grateful. Thank you.
Okay, so I guess first part was for me. As somebody who lived through war during teenage years. Okay, sorry. What I can say for young people, you need to give them a chance to use this energy they have now, to channel it in helping others and to build empathy. What we have found is that children who were able to take care of their families, their fathers, their mothers, their relatives, actually built sort of resilience, and within their families, they built resilience which helped them, if I can say, stay healthy, mentally healthy, and they can continue their own lives now. I think you have to count that there will be a lot of difficulties and a lot of issues after the war. The war will finish someday. So I think we have to take into account that there will be a lot of issues and problems with mental health, with physical health. But I think it's not all like a dark. You have to know that young people are very resilient. And if you give them a chance to channel this into some kind of they have to have a chance to help each other. So what we have found that this was actually, and the biggest coping mechanism for them was one, their family support, and the second was prayer. Their prayer groups. A lot of them said that during the most difficult times that they got most help from their priests. So this kind of spiritual help was very obvious in Croatia, and this is what helped our young people to build their resilience. But again, with the social media and negative news all around the world now, I think it's you have to be prepared that you will have a lot of young people with serious mental illness, mental health problems, and that you have to have professionals who will be able to help them. Hopefully, maybe we in Croatia can share our expertise in this area. But so, yeah, I hope I gave at least some kind of response that will, not everything is black, but I think you have a good reason for worry, but also good reason for hope for your young people. I was part of several lectures actually on Ukrainian universities, and a lot of young people said, yes, this is a very difficult time, but how can we help? So I think maybe if you channel this into a way of giving them opportunity to help each other, that may be helpful.
Okay, so let us pause for a minute with our Q&A panel, because we are delighted to see Professor Ботош with us. So welcome to our conference, Professor, and you can take now your part, if you wish.
Thank you so much. Excuse me for the voice problem. I cannot solve anyway. Do you hear me?
Yes, we do, but like in a doubled voice, so probably.
Yeah, I have a problem, I guess. I try to.
And now perhaps turn on the microphone on the device you are speaking right now.
I try it again. Well, it is disturbing to hear me in double voice.
Well, it's acceptable, I would say.
Okay. Thank you. So I will try to give an example of post-war healing. I'm not representing an official point of view of Hungarian politics. Just
Professor Ботош, maybe you can just come out and in once again. Or...
Yeah. So you can hear me now.
Yes, and much better.
That's much better. Okay. But you don't see me,
Unfortunately.
unfortunately. So I cannot be visible and audible at the same time. So that's a problem of my device, I guess. Well, as for the healing of a community after the war, I think that we have some experiences in Hungary, although I'm not representing any official point of view of my country. I'm just representing my personal opinion and my universities and my community's point of view. So first, I think the most important thing is to acknowledge the losses we have. We have to recognize that we have losses in human resources, as the economists are tempted to say, because it's much more than just numbers of deaths. It's just about the losses of people who will never come back and who will never be with us. These are the most important ones. Then we have the losses in material conditions. We have to recognize that we need to build up peace and a new era within a changing or a changed condition. There is a way of healing. We need to know that we have to survive in any way. So we need to find the possibilities how to manage time after our losses and after the loss is recognized. There are some good examples of that healing. We need to find a peaceful way to coexist. And I guess that is very difficult to tell it openly now. But we need to know that in several cases in history, in the recent 50 or 60 or 70 years, we have had some experiences of some reasonings. For example, in Rwanda, where the ethnic confrontations resulted mass killings. And then today we know a lot of people reconsidering their crimes, and they are serving the continuous peace building between the Tutsis and Hutus. We know that there is an example in European history, the peace between Germans and French. After the Second World War, after 2 world wars, we could realize somehow the peaceful coexistence between the 2 most important nations of Europe. Or we can cite the example of Spain, when after the Moncloa Pactum, the partners in the conflict found a way to manage a life after the inner war. So to be able to manage our future life after the conflict, after the war, after the losses we suffered, we need to learn once again to trust each other. And that is, I guess, the most important and the most difficult task. Because without having trust in other fellow brethren, we cannot build up neither peace nor our country, neither a future nor nation. So we need to trust in our brethren in order to strengthen or be life in future. And once again, that is serving the rebuilding of our identity. I don't want to tell the example of Hungary after the First World War. We suffered a lot of losses, both in territorial losses and in human resources, but we managed to maintain a national identity, and it has been, just like in the Ukrainian case, forged in crisis. And I guess Ukraine today is an example of forging a national identity due to that terrible crisis they are suffering now from. And that is also a chance, at least a compensation of having a strong and committed community of Ukrainians serving both peace and the rebuild of Ukraine in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ботош. So now we can return to the Q&A session, just with that difference that this time Professor Ботош may also join to those who answer. We were at that point where I am asking the listeners whether they have any questions. So, Miroslava, Solomia, Tatiana. Okay, so listeners prefer to listen. Right. Therefore, Professor Turza.
If we have time, I just would like to refer to what Professor Volodymyr said about this energy that you recognize. So I could say, so it is my opinion, but I believe many Croats share this opinion, that this energy was transformed into Croatia and become negatively perceived as some kind of nationalism because of European Union trends, I don't know, multicultural society, etc. So even our war veterans, as I know from other researches, are mainly perceived today as a part of this nationalism group. So this energy could easily be transformed to a negative opinion as nationalism. So this is something that was happened, and maybe also is related to our treatment of our war veterans, because our government give them a good opportunity to go to retirement and give them some good portion of money, and not included them in this transformation energy. So this energy could be, as I could put it in Gerardian terms, could be transformed in positive way or negative way.
Yeah, thank you. That was a valuable detail. So our former panel, which ended just before the beginning of this one, has ended with the assurance or with the thesis that hope must not be optimistic. It must not always be something bright or much promising, but it must be practically oriented. It must find its embedment in different deeds and institutions. And thank you all for repeating the same thesis, but this time in a much more detailed, specific, and experience-based manner, which I think was the main gain of our panel. So thank you all those who spoke and those who listened to us, and I hope see you as much as possible in a half of hour on our third panel. Thank you all.